Hi, I'm Colin Schantz, CEO of Copper Tree Solutions. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about outsourced IT. Some of the top reasons people are hesitant to outsource their IT is probably the biggest one that I hear is they like to have somebody down the hallway that they can go talk to, and they fear that if they don't have that, they're not going to get the kind of service that they're used to, or they fear that maybe when they call into the service desk, they're not going to the people they talk to aren't going to be familiar with their environment, or they won't be able to help, or maybe they fear that they're going to have to wait for a while on the phone, and nobody wants to do that. And most of it is driven by the feeling that if I've got somebody down the hall, I can just walk over there and talk to the individual, and if it's really urgent, then they can come and help right away. And those are all very legitimate thoughts and concerns as you think about outsourcing your IT. Some other reasons people might be hesitant to outsource their IT is they might have a vendor that they've been working with for a while, and even though they're not totally happy and they're not totally comfortable with the results that they're getting, they feel like it might be too painful to make a change. And typically, once people really look at it and understand what a change looks like, it's not as bad as people are afraid it might be. Making a change from one vendor to another, when we look at our onboarding process, essentially all we need is the passwords. So if we have the passwords, we'll come in, we document everything from end to end. We go through and we look at every piece of hardware, every piece of software, and every vendor that you work with. And we document it and we put our tools in place. And over the course of about a 1 to 2 week period, we will come in, we'll do our initial technical alignment. And at the end of that, we'll have everything in place to be able to properly support you. And we'll have a plan in place to take you from wherever you are today to where you need to be in the future. So it's usually not as big of a deal and not nearly as painful as people expect it might be. But I think most of the time what people are overlooking is there's also some very real benefits to outsourcing. And probably the biggest one is if you have particularly a small internal IT department, they tend to have all the knowledge is locked up in maybe one or two individuals. If something were to happen to that individual, it's very difficult for somebody else to come in and take over and help. And then when you think about skill set, when you have a broader group of individuals, a broader group of people looking at your system, you get a lot of different perspectives. And I know for us as an organization, as we work with our clients, we learn a lot. So we learn something at one client that we then take and apply at a different client. And it's super helpful for us to have this visibility into 35 different client environments. They're all somewhat similar and all somewhat different. And we can take the knowledge that we learn at each individual client and combine it, and it allows us to deliver a better service to our clients. The other thing to think about is when you have an internal IT department, can they be truly proactive, or do they spend most of their time dealing with reactive issues? What are they, if they have to pick between solving somebody's problem or doing maintenance on a system, they're going to do that. They're going to solve the problem because it's a more urgent in nature. And then finally, something to think about as well is the high level strategic planning that our virtual chief information officer, or VCIO, brings to the table is very difficult to maintain in a small internal department. It's pretty important from a strategic perspective that you have a high level business understanding and you really understand both business and also technology. So our VCIO has extensive experience in business, and really understands from the executive business level what it takes to make a business work. And we take that perspective and we say, how can we make technology work for your organization? One of the biggest reasons people choose to use an MSP if they've had an internal department for some time, is the fact that their business needs are changing. As time goes on, people are realizing just how dependent they are on technology and how critical it is to the success of their organization. And it's very difficult for an internal IT department to have a good proactive process in place, to have good maintenance procedures in place, and to be able to do the proactive work that needs to happen to keep everything running properly. Oftentimes, an internal department ends up spending a lot of their time dealing with reactive issues. There's people walking up to their desk that need help. There's people contacting them, and there's always a fire to put out somewhere that takes precedence over the proactive work that needs to happen. And the end result for the organization is that there's more issues than there really needs to be. And there's a higher level of risk. If nobody's doing the maintenance, if nobody is thinking about security and proactively working to keep everything configured properly and properly secured, it leaves the organization exposed. And so a lot of times people will turn to an outside provider, an MSP, to either outsource their IT management entirely, or do something like co-managed IT, where we work with the internal resource, and they continue to do the day-to-day support that they're really familiar with and really good at, and they allow us to come in and take on the proactive management of the infrastructure. So we're installing updates, we're going through and finding ways to improve the system. We're using our tools to monitor and manage the infrastructure, and ultimately providing support to that internal resource if they need to escalate something, or maybe they go off on vacation, and we can cover for them for a little while. Looking at the different options that are available to support your company from an IT perspective, people ask themselves, should I do it internally? Should I outsource it? What's the best thing for my organization? And the answer is somewhat, it depends. But typically, if your organization has between 10 and 200 users, you're usually a good candidate for outsourcing. And maybe you could go fully outsourced, or it may make sense to look at something like a co-managed model where you have a small internal team and you work with an outside vendor. But really, unless you have the ability and the time and energy to hire a full-blown internal IT staff that is good at both the strategy, the maintenance and support, the monitoring, and also just the day-to-day tasks that go with IT, setting up users and things like that. Unless you have the expertise to cover off all of those things, it usually makes sense to work with a vendor that has people dedicated to those particular roles, that are experts in those particular areas within IT. I'm Colin Shantz with Copper Tree Solutions. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about outsourced IT. If you have any questions, please visit our website, coppertreesolutions.ca, to connect with us.